Gotcha.
But we will speak in any case.
Seems like you have a pretty large group in attendance.
That's true. So, hello everybody to our Q&A session with Richard Mendelson, who is an organizational psychologist, right? And the
Yep.
professor at Kaiser University. So, welcome, Richard. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And
for having-
as you are an expert in human to human interaction, and you have mentioned in your keynote the situation with the actual pandemic, my first question will be are you suffering in some way the actual situation? Are you affected by the COVID-19?
Well, I mean, like everyone, when the lockdown situation happened, you know, my family, my immediate family, which is my wife, myself, and our son, we were certainly cut off from our family and our loved ones. Um, I'm fortunate in that my wife's parents live very close to us, and my son, at almost 11 years old, he typically spends at least one night a week over with his grandparents, and they're very close. They've been very close since he was born. Uh, and it was quite a shock where all of a sudden, he wasn't allowed to be around them. They weren't allowed to be in our house. We couldn't go to their house. And we were very limited in terms of communication um, because of what was going on socially. So yeah, I mean, I think like everyone, we've had challenges. Um, and then of course through work, although I do work primarily in a remote capacity, it was very challenging because, frankly, when all this happened, it was rather unexpected, and the infrastructure of the internet in terms of everything going to distance learning for kids and remote work for adults and things like that. The infrastructure, at least where I am, really wasn't capable of supporting that type of a workload on a consistent basis. So we were cut off for quite some time. We had enormous difficulties with our internet, and it was very challenging. Fortunately for us, we remained healthy. We remained isolated for quite some time, and like everyone, we're just trying to get our feet back under us now and move forward in the most positive way possible. But on a professional level, absolutely, I was impacted. Most institutions of higher education, to this point, they're very much traditional face-to-face brick and mortar type settings. And as one of the rare people in my field of study, which is, as you mentioned, industrial and organizational psychology, I kind of was tasked with helping everyone in my field globally to, to gear up to be able to effectively teach students in our field in an online setting. And that was really a challenge. Working across multiple platforms, with different levels of, varying levels of experience in terms of the use of internet and computers on the part of professors, things like that. So when most people went home and were kind of thinking, oh man, what am I going to do? My workload basically, tripled or quadrupled depending on the day. So I would say in a very good way, I suffered because I had an awful lot of work to do. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think it was a challenging time.
Um, Richard, you have some problems with the connection, maybe, because I can barely hear you. If you can switch your resolution to low, you
Hmm.
can find this bottom on the bottom of the screen where it's written HD. If you click
Um,
on it, it will be LD.
no,
Now
that's
I
not.
see your table.
Yeah, let me see. Hold on. I don't think that I have that option because I'm using the app for AirMeet.
Oh,
So unfortunately, I don't believe I have that option. If you'd like, I mean, I can certainly turn off the camera. It may be better than looking at this for an hour.
no, no. For the
So,
moment, let's continue. Let's try to.
okay, I'm sorry about that. Give me one
It's okay.
second. Let me grab my AirPods and perhaps
Yep,
that will help. Give me one moment.
sure.
Or
Sure. And I just remember to all our attendees that you can send messages, questions in chat, or you can write them in Q&A. And if you want to ask personally, Richard, there is an option to raise hand, and I can teleport you to the stage. And the question for the attendees is, are you affected by the coronavirus or not?
Okay, can you
Hi.
hear me now?
Yep.
Hi, is this better?
Yep, definitely.
Okay, so I apologize. What was the question you just asked me?
Not exactly you. It was the question for for our attendees if they are affected by the
Oh,
COVID-19. Yes. Uh, do you miss this human-to-human interaction, like in real life, this face-to-face meetings or something?
yeah. So my primary area of research is actually emotional intelligence. And a big part of emotional intelligence is the way that we interact with one another, not just in terms of speaking or seeing, but nonverbal communication, nonverbal cues, facial expressions, body language, um, the unspoken aspect of human interaction. And I think what's interesting is that while we're very fortunate to live at a time when there's platforms like Zoom and AirMeet and all these other great, platforms that allow us to speak face to face, I think over time the the nonverbal communication was severely lacking, and I think it's difficult to cope with. I think that there's a sense of like a feeling of distance between people who are otherwise close. And what's interesting is now, at least in the United States, people in most places are going back to work, and they're allowed to interact face to face again because of the vaccine programs. But what we're finding is people are talking about there's a degree of like discomfort, if you will, even around people that you have known for many years and that you interacted with in a face-to-face way prior to COVID. There's a level of discomfort because the social norms have changed, and even people, and I don't mean just like a handshake or something like that, but people that you normally would see and maybe give them a hug and or something like that. There's a different feeling now because that level of comfort is not there. Not only because of COVID, but also because it's been so long since those norms in the relationship you have with that person have been exercised. So it's it's challenging for people now to kind of get back on the horse, as they say, in terms of being face to face, even with loved ones. Um, there's there's a lot of challenges we're going to see that are going to manifest and have begun manifesting, in particular with children. Kids especially need that face-to-face physical interaction for their social development, and the way that they frame the world is based on where they fit in into that box, if you will, of who they are and how they impact and influence the world that is around them, and that has changed. I know just the other day it was interesting. I was speaking with my son, and he's in school on site, but many of his classmates are remote. And in the interest of making sure all the kids fit in with one another, even the kids who are remote, they have to wear a mask when they're on camera at home. So the kids who are on site and have to wear a mask, yeah, and they don't feel like somehow socially different from one another. But what's interesting is, although my son has his group of friends and they play together regularly through like video games and things like that, I asked him something, as most parents probably do, as their child gets a little bit older. And I said, Jake, are there any pretty girls in your class? And he looked at me and completely serious, he said, I don't know. Everybody's wearing masks. I have no idea what my friends look like. And and it just really hit me that, a lot of the things that we think of with our close relationships, we have this ability to communicate with one another without actually having to speak. When it's somebody maybe you're in a relationship with or you have a close friendship with, you can speak volumes just by giving them a look or the way that you move or whatever the case may be. And all of a sudden that's gone. There's no ability to read, the facial expressions that people, have anymore, because not only do you not physically see them when people are masked, but you've missed out on the development of your ability to identify and interpret those facial expressions properly. And I think that we're going to see a lot of issues with that as time passes. A lot of very mixed signals in social communication. Relationships have become more challenging. Imagine the aspect of, like, if you're a single person and you're dating during COVID, what a nightmare that could be, especially if you're dealing with distance dating, like through an online dating platform or application of some sort. So yeah, there's a lot of things that are going on that we're just now beginning to recognize are going to be challenges or problematic for people at varying levels in terms of, of society, in terms of age, language barriers, cultural differences. It's all been exacerbated by this pandemic. And look, of course, we're going to survive, and we will eventually reach a state where everything is going to be okay again. But it's certainly a strange time to be alive. What a wild time to be a human being. We're more connected than ever before, but we're also more isolated than we've ever been historically. So it's been strange.
That's true. It's really true. And during your keynote, I launched the poll about stimuli, and I asked our audience what is the most powerful stimulus for them. So people voted for first place video or vision, smell,
Mm-hmm.
and taste. What is the most
Yeah.
powerful stimulus for you?
So for me, it's smell. Um, I guess that it's probably partially of how I grew up. Um, where I where I was where I lived and in my family, um, we were always cooking something, always. So whether it was waking up on a Sunday morning and knowing my grandparents were coming over and we were going to have a family breakfast and smelling that, or going over to my grandmother's house on the holidays and smelling all of the the traditional, like, Jewish fare, the
Mhm.
stuffed cabbage, the brisket, the chicken soup, things like that. For me, memory is very tightly connected to smells. But I don't think it's surprising that the majority of people said that they are visual, especially when, for really the past 12 to 18 months, we've really been limited to basically almost only visual and auditory stimuli. So it's kind of natural that you're going to, without even really thinking of it on a conscious level, you're going to consider what you have the most data points from. And right now, for almost everybody, that's going to be the visual aspect of our sensory experience. So I think it's pretty normal and pretty expected, frankly, that people would very strongly identify with being visual right now.
Only few people replied that the most powerful stimulus is touch. What do you think about it?
Well, again, like what I was just saying about us being almost entirely just visual and auditory right now. Um, well, on the flip side of that, one thing we've really missed out on for a year to a year and a half is the sense of touch, especially when it comes to the human to human interaction. It may be hard to imagine, but if you were, let's say you were a single person and you live in your own home, there's a strong probability that for the better part of at least a year, you may not have actually touched another human being. And we're very social creatures, where we're very interactive in terms of our sensory experience. We gauge the way that we frame experiences based on our sensory input. So just to give you an example, if you're with somebody that you're attracted to, and you hold their hand, that touch, it feels good. You want to be in physical contact with that person. But if you're with somebody and you don't like them, but for whatever reason you're forced to be too close to them and you're touching, like whether it's on a subway train or the uncomfortable thing about being in an airplane seat where you never know who gets to use the armrest, and sometimes the arm is right up against you and it's uncomfortable. So touch is a very important aspect of how we frame experiences, because it's literally a visceral experience that we have. Um, but we've not had that, at least to the degree that we would prefer to, or that we normally would, for quite some time now. So people become more reliant on the senses they have access to. So just to put it in perspective, imagine asking a person who was born without vision, a blind person from birth, if you were to ask them, well, what sight do you, or what sense is most important to you? I think the majority of them would probably not put vision, because they've built their life around not having that sensory experience, and it's a challenging thing, because the experience of isolation, or really being quarantined with only a couple of very close family member type people, it's a very unique, very strange, and really potentially a very damaging experience. We need human interaction. We need that ability to give somebody praise and pat them on the back and say, you did a great job on that project at work.
Mm-hmm.
Or, as a grandparent, the ability to physically pick up your grandkid and just give them a hug. It communicates so much without having to speak. That feeling of closeness that you share with the people you love, and that's been missing. So it's not something that I think on a conscious level people recognize necessarily, but certainly we've become a visual and auditory world almost exclusively. So with that in mind, I mean, the results of your poll, I think it's expected, but it's also, frankly, I think from a communication perspective and the human perspective, it's it's a little bit off-putting, because you wonder how long it's going to take for things to snap back and for us to have that level of comfort, or will we ever have that level of comfort again? We've lost a lot through this experience.
In your opinion, can Internet of Senses help in your work? Can
Oh,
can it help, for example, for people in isolation, maybe for people with some psychological disorders?
I think absolutely. One of the things that we see in varying fields, whether it be military personnel who are deployed. Obviously, when you're deployed and you're in, like, say, a forward combat setting, um, there's obviously the stressors that you live with on a daily basis of being in that geographic region and knowing the potential for, negative outcomes. But when you add to that the stresses of being away from your personal support system, being away from the people that you care about the most, who care about you the most, those who you love. Um, I mean, absolutely, I think that it brings more of a negative experience to people who otherwise would probably fare a lot better in not so opportune circumstances. The ability to feel like you're giving someone a kiss on the cheek goodnight, if it's your kid and you could be deployed for, let's say, 18 months. If your child is 3 when you're deployed, you're going to get back, your kid's going to be almost 5 years old. I mean, that's an enormous chunk of their life to miss out on. And anything that we can, provide that will help people to be more present and have more of those shared experiences through sensory mechanisms, I think is going to be very positive. Um, Now, also, I mean, you asked about my work in particular. I would say absolutely. I think one of the challenges that I have faced as a person who is in higher education, is that people tend to see, distance programs and they immediately label them, and there's a stigma associated that, oh, well, somehow if it's distance learning, it's not as good, it's not as effective. But to have the opportunity and the ability to build rapport through shared sensory experiences, to use things such as, like, say, augmented reality and haptic devices, to have a true classroom experience, especially when it comes to research and running labs and doing some pretty advanced inferential statistics and things like that. Without doubt, having that ability to have it be a more immersive experience is going to be incredibly positive, not just for the students, but frankly also for faculty, who I know through the past 12 to 18 months, there has been an enormously high level of burnout among people in higher education because of the added stressors of the pandemic. So being able to use these devices and use this technology and eventually the Internet of Senses to create not just I guess a singular sensory experience, but an immersive multi-sensory experience. It's a game changer. It's a life changer, and frankly, it's a world changer. In the research that I've done when it comes to things like robotic microsurgery and things like that, I mean, being able to create an artificial laboratory using haptic devices to be able to hone your skills as a robotic microsurgeon, I mean, the positive outcomes of something like that in terms of what the increase will be in successful surgical procedures, decreased mortality, things like that. I mean, it's astronomical. It's to the point that it's like right now, being able to truly conceptualize what the positive outcomes could be, I don't think is really possible. It's like if you sit back and you try and think about all the potential, it feels almost like, to go back to the analogy earlier, if I was born blind and I've never seen any color and someone is trying to describe to me what blue looks like, I can listen to them, I can hear them, I can possibly imagine, but I just have no frame of reference because nothing like that has ever happened to me. I feel like this is a very similar thing. I mean, the Internet of Senses is going to have such a profound and deep impact on all aspects of life. I don't think we can truly wrap our brains around it until we're living in it.
Mm,
It's mind-boggling. There's nothing we do right now that can't be done equally in terms of the experience through distance or through any type of separation, if we have a truly fully functional Internet of Senses. So this is not just making a dent in the universe. This is like taking the universe and just crushing it like an empty soda can type of impact. This is profound beyond my level to articulate.
what will be the first device empowered by Internet of Senses that you would like to try? Like a
Oh,
smell
that I would
mask?
like to try?
Yes.
Okay.
Haptic
I would
glasses?
love. All right. So I don't know if anybody here has ever been to Epcot. It's a theme park in Orlando, in Florida. And it was started years ago. Epcot is an acronym. It's the Experimental Project Community of Tomorrow. And what's interesting about this theme park is they have different areas of the park that are set up like different countries around the world. So you can essentially travel the world by walking through Epcot. And if we had some type of haptic technology that allowed you to taste things over distance, oh my goodness, I would love to tour the world at Epcot and really taste food from everywhere in the world. I love the combination of taste and smell. Um, I'm one of those people that before I taste food, it's like I just and you just let the aroma kind of,
Yeah.
settle in, and it just adds so much to that experience when you finally get to just take a bite of whatever it is that you're going to eat. Um, I know I just outed myself as like the inner fat guy, but that's me. But anyway, I mean, it's the thing of being able to taste food around the world would be phenomenal. But I think that the societal implications of that, of being able to take food that people would say is less desirable in terms of taste, but is more highly nutritious, and essentially use that technology in a way that will allow people to eat the more nutritious food while being able to experience the joy of food they would prefer to taste. I think that's going to be huge, not just in a sense of being able to help individuals in terms of their health, but I mean, in terms of global hunger. I mean, we have certain crops in certain areas that can be grown in abundance. In other areas, those same crops can't be grown at all. But if we're able to, I guess, let's say, alter perception of taste, I think we're going to be able to get people to eat foods that are more nutritious for them and perhaps easier to produce than a lot of the mass produced and processed foods that people eat only for taste right now. But I will say this. I think that in all likelihood, if you look at past history of what really drives um, technological advances in terms of the sensory experience, I think it'll probably be more along the lines of something that has to do with tactile sensation or touch.
Peter, Peter, about OVR. OVR will present their keynotes today. So thank you for your message.
Yep.
Would you permit your son to use such devices or not? Or do you believe that maybe children should be banned until a certain age?
I think that what we've learned just from the internet as we have it is that, unfortunately, look, I'm a psychologist. I feel comfortable in saying that the humanists were wrong. Humanists believe that left to their own devices, human beings will reach the pinnacle of what human beings can be, and everyone is inherently good. I think the internet has absolutely shown us not all human beings are inherently good. So while I think that I don't believe I would have an issue with my son using technology, I would certainly want there to be mechanisms in place to ensure that I'm not exposing my son to people and to things and experiences that perhaps as a parent I'm not comfortable with him being exposed to. Um, but a big thing that is going on globally right now, we're just now kind of coming to grips with the use of like artificial intelligence in different applications. And we're just now putting together guidance and ethical tenets with regard to its use and things like that. And they're not even globally accepted yet. So I think that we have a long way to go in terms of the technologies that we're talking about today to ensure that their use is ethical and safe. Because I think we've seen that technology can be incredibly damaging. Um, and for kids especially, even just, social media, social networking, we've seen the rise in bullying, we've seen the rise in teen suicides and other really horrible things that happen because kids are given a level of social interaction that perhaps are not yet equipped to deal with. So I think it would be a very challenging situation as a parent, and also a difficult decision. Because obviously, I mean, if you have technology, it's great that you have it, but who is the right person who should decide whether we should or shouldn't use that technology for these different applications? That's the challenge.
There's a question from Magdalena. Can you please repeat what this app is, Richard? I suppose it's about this thing in Orlando.
Oh, Epcot, EPCOT. It's a gigantic theme park, so kind of like Disney World, but I guess the way I would describe it, okay, so most people, many people in attendance here are like technology entrepreneurs, right?
Mhm.
So if you were to think about, let's say 40 years ago, imagine being a person in your field 40 years ago, and in your mind's eye, you envision what the future will look like. Well, Epcot was built to look like what the future was supposed to look like by people 40 years ago. So now it's completely outdated, but it's interesting because the things that they thought were going to happen did not really happen the way that they believed they would. But they do show countries around the world and the different states that technology is in, different cultural aspects of each country around the world. So it's a very interesting place. Yeah.
Do you think that it's possible to democratize the access to the Internet of Senses and devices? Or it should be, or not, maybe not should be, but it will be for some years, something like a privilege only of rich people?
I think that, so here's the thing. The technology that's going to be necessary for a person to have a fully immersive sensory experience is going to be quite costly, at least initially. We've seen over time, I mean, that as people develop things more and mass produce them more, and you have a competitive market for different products and things like that, costs tend to be driven down. But I think that one thing that people need to really take into account is, the politics that are involved in things like this. There are certain aspects of government who will immediately move to regulate the use of technology like this. There will be other aspects of government that will want to essentially hide technology like this and use it for probably more nefarious purposes, uh, including things like social control and military applications.
Mhm.
You're also going to have people who believe this should be free to everyone, and I think we all know that free is never really free. So there will be challenges for that. But when you ask about people who are privileged being the ones who will have it, um, I know America, where I live, is a very industrialized place. We still have people in major cities in the United States of America who don't have access to the internet. Kids who are going to school in the age of technology who either cannot afford to have internet in their homes, cannot afford computer to have in their homes. So these kids are spending more time going to the public libraries or having to do things that other kids do not have to do just to be able to do their regularly assigned schoolwork. So I think that there's already an enormous difference in terms of the privileged class having more access than more socioeconomically challenged people. Um, but I will say what's really interesting about it is that people have integrated technology into their lives to an extent at this point they don't realize it's a privilege. They just feel like this is everyday life. So it's not that they don't appreciate, it's that we have a generation of people who they've never been without technology. So like, my generation, I think, is probably the last group of people who would be considered like not tech native. I mean, I remember when I was a kid and Nintendo, the game system came out. It was this huge thing. But I mean, there are kids today. I feel so old saying kids today, but there are kids today who they've never known the world without an iPad or without an iPhone or some type of Android technology. I mean, this is something that parents are taking it and putting it in the hands of infants, and they're playing games. They're watching shows. They're frankly being educated through technology as opposed to through personal human interaction. So I think when we look at things and we look at the social problems that kids are having right now, um, maybe it's because I'm getting old. It could be, but I strongly believe that their exposure to technology is not necessarily the culprit. but it's the combination of increased exposure to technology and decreased exposure to actual human interaction. And I think that's why we're having so many social issues with kids right now.
Do you think the Internet of Senses can be somehow shocking for people or unacceptable at all?
You said unacceptable?
Yeah.
Yeah. I shudder to bring this up in a forum like this because obviously we have like very esteemed people who are speaking and in attendance. But I mean, I think if you were to think about certain industries, for example, that have exploded in terms of profit because of the internet, um, frankly, the adult entertainment industry. I think I may have had a conversation with you at some point about this stuff. That industry in particular, and it's not a judgment, situation on me. If people engage in that, great. If they don't, that's fine too. But I think you're putting an entirely different experience out there when it goes beyond the visual and auditory and moves into the realm of actual tactile sensation experiences, especially where it's very difficult to govern and regulate websites that kids can go to now. So when you have young kids who have access to these types of haptic devices, I mean their opportunity to experience things at far too young an age exponentially increases. But the reality is that industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and I just don't think that it's going to be governed or regulated in such a way that we'll be able to prevent stuff like that. Now, I can't sit here and tell you that those experiences are going to be profoundly damaging to kids or things like that because we haven't had that happen yet, and I can't predict the future. But I can say as a parent, I certainly would want to be aware of what my kid is doing when he's using these devices to ensure that he's not engaging in stuff like that before I believe he's ready. But that puts the onus back on, parents. And, one of the things I think people have an issue with, frankly, when it comes to technology is the ethical aspect that, a lot of times you have really private sector companies that invent technology and they say, well, we have it and it works, let's sell it. But they don't necessarily take time to think about it from the ethical or human perspective of what type of an impact can this have on people. Um, So I think it goes back to just because we can, does that mean that we should? Um, and that's a debate that we could go in circles all day. And there's positives and negatives on both ends of that. So I think it can certainly be inappropriate. Um, I think it needs to be governed properly.
Do you think we should prepare people to the Internet of Senses and all the devices that work on this technology?
I absolutely think that we should. I think that this is it's something that it's happening. We're already living through some of the initial stages of this. I mean, ultimately, I listen. I know you and we share a colleague who has put an enormous amount of effort into being able to upload human consciousness to the point that when physical death happens, your being or your soul, if you want to call it that, will live on in cyberspace. I mean, and like I said in the presentation, I know things like this may sound or seem outrageous when I say them, but we're living through this. People are doing this stuff and working towards it right now. Many people believe that the first generation of truly immortal people is already here because we will have the technology to ensure that their whatever you want to call it, their being survives through physical death somehow. Whether that's through upload into some form of, like a web-based platform or what, I don't know. But the belief is that these people are already here. And with that in mind, I just feel like, there's momentum behind this and we're not going to be able to stop it. And I don't think we should stop it. But I think that the saddest part about it is that as these opportunities present themselves, oftentimes it's the people among us who are the most predatory who are able to use them to capitalize beyond comprehension. And I think that from a business perspective, if you have a product and there's practical applications, I think it's wonderful. But I think that we need to be cautious about the access given to different people to these devices. I think it needs to be something that people are brought into relatively slowly. And it may be different for people who were born into a generation where it's commonplace. But I mean, look, we have people right now who are in their geriatric years who they don't know how to use email, and they wouldn't use it even if they had it. And that's something that's been around for, what, more than 40 years at this point. Um, but we need to realize that not everyone is the same. We all have different life experiences. And as such, we're going to have different driving forces that will lead us to use this technology in different ways.
Thank you, Richard. As we still have like maybe 1 or 2 minutes, maybe just some tips for like how we can save our mental health during the pandemic and isolation. Maybe some
Sure,
advice.
sure. So the first thing that people have, a lot of the research articles that have been coming out have indicated that people have not been taking any time for what we call self-care. Um, People are very focused on work. People are very stressed about jobs with the challenges that the economies are facing around the world. People are very concerned with work and being able to provide. But I think what we really are forgetting is that if we fall apart, we're not going to be any good for anyone, including our family or the organizations that we're working for. So a big part of what we do, we need to make sure that we budget our time and set aside some time each day to decompress, because your physical health and your mental health are very closely tied, and stress isn't good for either of them. Um, so that's the first thing. The second thing I think is that, you know, in times when people are isolated, we tend to cut ourselves off from people who are not in our, you know, inner circle, so to speak, our immediate family. It's important to reach out to people who you value and whom value you, and have conversations and interact with them. If you have the ability to do so through FaceTime, I think that's even better. The human aspect of this experience is really been the most damaging, I believe, to people who have lived through it. So I think that communicating with people and allowing yourself time to be a human being, not just be a caregiver to your kids or to your older family members, or to be an employee for a company that you work for or something like that. You need to allow yourself to be a human. You need to allow yourself to experience the emotions. Um, a lot of times we kind of try and suppress them because it interferes with how we interact with others. But we need to be careful about how we're interacting with ourselves. And most people aren't really doing that. Um, I think finding positive ways to sublimate, which is expressing your negative energy, your anxiety, your stress, and channeling it into positive things, whether it be music or art or exercise or whatever it is for you that works. I think that's extremely important right now. And listen, organizations all over the world, they're talking about what they call corporate wellness and caring about their human beings and the human capital and all that stuff. But the reality is, most of them are not going to do it for you. You're going to need to do it for you. And I think we all need to do that. So that would be my recommendation.
Thank you very much, Richard.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Now we are ending our session, and I invite all the attendees to go to the lounge to do some networking, and in 10 minutes we will start other keynotes. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.